There we go. All right. Good morning, guys. It's funny because this session was supposed to be at 12 o'clock yesterday as well as 9 o'clock this morning, but for scheduling reasons, they moved to 12 o'clock. And I always said it's always hard to do a session first thing in the morning the day after one of our parties. So I was clearly correct, but thank you for coming. Hopefully you guys have had a great experience so far here at Trailhead DX. What we're going to be talking about today is really one of the cornerstones, or if not the cornerstone, of this next wave of customization within Salesforce. And it's really about using Lightning components as a way to really quickly create innovation and overall overall value for your customer. And so I'm Marcus Torres. I'm a senior director here of product here at Salesforce. And I lead, along with my kind of partner in crime right there, Srini, the components effort here at Salesforce. So all the Lightning components that we deliver, a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about today is within kind of our leadership. And so let's kind of get started. But just like any other presentation you've seen, our lawyers always say we have to show this, so I'm going to show it yet again, even though you've seen it 50 times. This is our forward-looking statement. It's just simply saying that make buying decisions based on today's current functionality and not on forward-looking or future functionality, which we will talk about briefly at the end. So what are we going to talk about? A lot of the questions I tend to get around components is, one, it's either really technical, and someone's trying to do something and they need some help and kind of figuring it out. But a lot of times people just don't understand all the constructs of components. So I'm going to go through that relatively quickly because I have actually a good amount of code to show and kind of walk through all this with you so you have a really good understanding of how components work, how they work within kind of our framework, and where to really go from there. So first and foremost, you see a lot of kind of slides with chiclets around all the services and pieces that we have. So I really want to kind of ground this in kind of the layer cake, if you will. So you may know things like our multi-tenant infrastructure, right, or multi-tenant cloud. That's really that trust level. You have all kinds of shared services and data and events, everything from kind of your objects the actual structure or data model within your org to things like, the eventing platform that you may have seen over the last day or two. But what I really want to focus on is essentially this blue layer, kind of looks like somewhere in the middle, this application layer, right? This application layer is really where is really the extensibility layer for you. So this is the place where you're going to go to customize and build amazing apps using Lightning and using Lightning components. And so, and then there's two kinds of components, the way we think about it at least. We have what we call base components and we have experience components. Now, if any of you are, say, traditionally more of a back-end kind of Java developer, you may be used to things like, oh, I have this class and inheritance and that kind of paradigm. Well, the pattern really in a component-based framework, right, is composition. How do you take components and compose them together to form an application, to form another component, to form things of that nature? So that's kind of what we're going to walk through. The one thing that I wanted to just, so you understand, about our application layers, this is actually how we deliver every feature you see in Lightning as an organization. So every team within R&D that is building features, everything from, say, opportunities pipeline to Service Cloud, everyone is really building the same way we're asking you to build. They're building Lightning components, they're composing Lightning components together. And that's a big difference than, say, Salesforce Classic, right? Salesforce Classic, we would develop features different than you would. You would use something like Visualforce for your customizations. and we would do something else internally. But now everything's aligned with Lightning, both how you build and how we build. And so to kind of put this in context, we have our base components. These are really the root kind of base level of components. You know, things like input fields, things like buttons, things like icons, things like tab bars, where we essentially maintain the structure of the tab bar, and it's really up to you to fill in the content within each one of those tabs. And then what happens is if you take those building blocks, those kind of Lego pieces, if you will, you're then going to construct what we call an experience component. An experience component essentially is a functional component, something that has behavior, something that has essentially maybe even a flow to it. And so the example you see here on the right is the chatter feed, where you have the chatter feed or chatter post, where what you have is you have the tabs that maintain the different content. You have things like input rich text and button icons for the bottom, as well as buttons, but everything there is kind of wired up. It is a fully functional component, right? And of course, we have our Lightning pages. So all the different Lightning pages that you've seen, the ability to customize those Lightning pages are based on this paradigm that you've now taken those experience components. You have then integrated that into your Lightning page, right? And so whether it's, for example, our highlights panel, our tabs, the sales path component, the news feed, all of those are experience components, right? And so when you think about how you would do component development, you would do it in a very similar paradigm. You would use our base components, or potentially even like HTML components themselves. You would then compose your experience component, and then what you would then do is you would decide how that experience component fits within a page, an app, etc. And that's really how Lightning Experience is made up of. It's made up of all these Lightning pages that have experience components that are composed by base components. And of course, what do you do once you have that experience component is you're going to use the app builder to kind of drag and drop that into your overall application for the customization. So you can build home pages, you can build app pages, you can customize record pages, and of course we have different dimensions or kind of dimensions that you can do that by, whether it's record type, profile, app, etc. So when it comes to the component development itself, you need to understand the structure of a component as well. So a component is made up of a bunch of sub-pieces, if you will. Now there's the component itself. This is like your markup. This is HTML, right? It doesn't matter if you're thinking about Lightning or any other component-based UI framework. It's typically, if you're going to narrow it down, you have a bunch of HTML, you have a bunch of CSS, and you have a bunch of JavaScript, right? In general, it works the same way. So you have the component itself, which is the HTML and maybe the base components. You have your controller, your JavaScript, which is either in your helper or in your just pure kind of controller, which is the kind of both of them JavaScript files. You have all of your CSS, all your styling is going to be within your component style. And then the rest of these is really about, hey, how do people reference the documentation of this component? For the design file, which we'll be talking about through code in a second, the design file is really about extending, kind of doing what we do here at Salesforce. Taking things that are typically programmatic, things that require code, and extending that to a new class or a wide range of class of skill sets, right? So through this design file, and I'll show you in code in a second, you then are able to say, hey, I have this programmatic component that, say, an admin couldn't write, or maybe a power user couldn't write. But now, because I created a design file, I have extended this to them through the app builder, and now they can do things without requiring changes in code. So we're going to go through that. And the SVG icon, just an icon, so it looks, it has its own icon with an app builder. and of course the renderer itself. So the renderer is really about every component has a life cycle, or our framework has a life cycle for how we do rendering. And this allows you to tap into that and essentially do some specific handling on the rendering itself. Now, the next question is, as you make these customizations, and this was very, very true in Salesforce Classic, your customization can diverge the user experience from the rest of the app. So one of the things we have developed, something that we've open sourced and something that we push across our entire company is our Lightning design system. So a common set of essentially styles, so that as our developers are doing things and as you are doing things, you can use these styles, you can use our tokens, and essentially your customization will have a seamless experience with the rest of Salesforce, which is, at the end of the day, what we all care about is a seamless experience for our customers, right? And our users. And the good thing is we're going to change our design tokens. Like right now it's the way it looks. Maybe in 3 months from now you'll have dancing bears. Who knows, right? But when we do those things, if you use our design tokens, you're going to get that for free. You're going to get those styles and those changes automatically, and you don't have to keep updating those. And of course, because we not only have the CSS, but we actually show you in open source kind of the HTML code, the pure HTML code that goes into a lot of our base components and a lot of Salesforce in general. So if you, for whatever reason, wanted to create a custom component and still leverage a bunch of the things we do, we actually give you the code for that, kind of the pure HTML code. So the last piece before we get into the code is really about the development tools. There's kind of 3 flavors for how we do how we do development on our platform. One is our essentially web-based IDEs, what we call our development console. That's basically what I'll use today. You have Sublime, which is typically how I do my development as far as Lightning development, right? It's my favorite text editor. It's integrated within Salesforce. You get highlighting all the cool things. And then, of course, if you are, a true pro developer, I'm sure you have something like Eclipse, right? And so we have Force IDE, which is baked into that. You get a lot of the type ahead and all the kind of features you would expect within our Force IDE experience. And of course, if you've seen Salesforce DX, you've seen all of the kind of command line tools and how that also integrates back to the Force IDE. So this is a dev conference. Let's stop talking slides and start talking code. So the very first thing I'm going to do is we're going to actually create a new component. But first, kind of let me walk you through. I'm sure some of you have seen this Dreamhouse app. The reason why we all use this Dreamhouse app as a point of reference is 2 things. One, it has context and kind of it's a full application that kind of works together. 2, it's open source in the sense that we publish it on GitHub and you can go download it. So as you're thinking about your customizations, go and look at our code, reuse our code for your purposes, right? And so, of course, the Dreamhouse app is all about essentially property management. I have a number of properties. I have a number of brokers. It's all about kind of the listings and managing those things. So if you take Salesforce out of the box, this is what you get. You get a form with fields. Yeah, we have some actions. Yeah, we have some interactions. But this isn't super compelling in today's age of amazing web and kind of cross-platform applications, right? So I want to do something more. I want to do something more engaging. And so what we have is our app builder. So how you get there is essentially you can say, hey, I want to edit this page. I want to customize it for myself. Now we have a series of standard components here on the left-hand side. And then you'll also see this area of custom components, right? So one of the things about components is it really allows a interactive or engaging or much more visual experience to kind of key elements, right? So one of these I'm gonna drag on here is the days on the market. We're gonna walk through some of this code. The other thing I'm gonna drag on here is a map, right? Because instead of seeing these fields and seeing an address, I actually want to see the context of where this is. Maybe my brokers, whenever looking at a property, they actually want to see similar properties that are right there and available to them. And lastly, I'm going to do this thing called Neighborhood Explorer, which is a component that just doesn't go off Salesforce data, but a component that actually goes against Yelp as a way to kind of pull in schools and restaurants and things that are close to this property, right? Now think about it, like these components, these customizations are all about integrating that experience and making the workflow of that experience as effective and as essentially awesome as possible, right? And so if I save these things and I go back, maybe it didn't stay, there we go. What you'll see here is, all right, I know exactly where this house is. I understand, like I have context. Now, days on the market, right? Now this could just be a field, right? This is just a field. And does it say the same thing? Sure. But does it actually drive what you want from a business perspective? Like this is over 30 days, this is an issue, right? You get to 60 days and this turns red. Similarly with the similar properties here, by price or by bedroom, like what it's actually trying to do is say, I don't want you to have to go click on this tab, find a related list of similar properties, all these kind of things. I'm just gonna integrate it right into your flow. And then of course this Neighborhood Explorer where it's actually pulling in data from a third-party source via a kind of micro app on Heroku. And so here you kind of get a feeling for a much better experience for your user, right? This is totally better than a page with a bunch of fields on a page. And so now let's actually go into the code. So the very first place I'm going to start is days on the market. And the way you get to the dev console is you click this little gear here and you go to dev console. And if I go and I open days on the market, why am I missing it? It's not my, there we go. You can see this component bundle I talked about before. You have the component, the controller, the helper, the style, etc. So if we actually look at this component, it's pretty straightforward. You have a series of attributes. Attributes are just, they're variables. It's like var in JavaScript, okay? And you have an attribute for various aspects of this component. The record ID, and you'll notice that there's an interface on record pages that you almost always want to use called force has record ID. And this essentially gives you the context of the record right there and then. You have a attribute or a variable, if you will, for the entire record itself. So essentially an object to represent the entire record. You have an attribute for formatted date listed, and of course the status. Now this is really important. This is something that basically if you haven't heard me or maybe some of my colleagues doing other sessions, force record data is something we call, it's the Lightning Data Service. Lightning Data Service is the standard controller for Lightning. How many of you know what a standard controller is for Visualforce? So fair amount, I'd say like 50%. It is that equivalent, but for Lightning. So essentially without having to write Apex anymore or Sockle, you can essentially retrieve a single record. It also has methods on that component, so you can do things like save, delete, create new. So super, super helpful. And now let's actually talk about composition a little bit. So I told you earlier, components are all about composing that component from a set of base components, right, or other components. And so that's exactly what's happening here. We have a component called Lightning Card. Think of this as like a div, but it allows you to have things like an icon that's associated with it, simply by referencing the icon that's in SLDS. You can give it a title, and it basically does all the styling for you. And then as you look into this component, we use another Lightning-based component called Lightning Layout. And this is exactly like it sounds, right? What we want to do is take all of the work away from you to manage things like layout. Now, if any of you are UI developers, which I imagine you are, and why you're here, you know that sometimes managing the layout of items on a page really sucks, right? You're sitting there, you're doing CSS, you're debugging things with Chrome DevTools. And personally for me, like CSS is one of the worst things on the planet, not because it's not powerful, but because I am clearly not good enough at it. Because I think there's 11 different layers of hierarchy to CSS, if I remember correctly. And I always seem to screw those up. And next thing I know, I'm like, oh, this is gonna work. You know, absolutely. And I refresh my page, something is like way off on the right, and I'm sitting there, I'm like Googling Stack Exchange, somebody gives me something, and I put the code in, it works, but I don't actually get it, right? So we want to take a lot of that challenge away from you by giving you these base components that do these kind of complex things within, because we've invested in all that already. And so that's where layout comes in. So layout and layout item, obviously it sounds exactly how you think. Each one of the items within that layout, and you can give it general attributes, right? That's how our components talk. They either talk in attributes or events. And so you have series of attributes like flexibility here, which does exactly what you think it does. And you notice that what I'm doing is I'm referencing the status to kind of set the class, right? So the way that this particular component is changing is it's simply changing based on, all right, what class do I use if it's less than 30 days, more than 30 days, more than 60 days? And so if we actually look at the controller for this, the controller is very, very simple. It just says, hey, I want this record updated function to be called anytime this is loaded or this is changed. And based on that, it has a helper function. You have this show days on market. And what you're seeing here is the default status is green. Then if it goes beyond 30 days, it's orange, and then beyond 60 days, it's red. Like super simple, you're setting the value of that back into the view or into the component. So if I go back to that component and you see that status attribute, that variable, that's being used, that's being set so that all of this CSS will change, right? And you've noticed that in this record data, there's a record updated event. And that's simply saying like, when data changes, I want to run a custom function. Now you don't have to with Force Record Data or the Lightning Data Service. It will auto update your data. But if in this case, sure, I get the updated data, but I actually want to do something with it. I want to change the value of, in this case, the status variable, which will then set all of the classes, right? So if we just go back, and let's just say I change, I guess, date listed to somewhere in the past. Somewhere in the past, so I'm gonna go April 1st, and I save it, you're gonna see that all of that changes dynamically, right? So this is the value of components. Now, you kind of watch through one of these pieces of code. I wanna actually go and talk about one of the other great advantages of components and how you as developers can add value now to the rest of your organization by providing essentially what is called a design file, which allows you to extend this component, but to non-developers. So in this case, where you see similar properties by price, you can see as I change my price, and maybe I make it like $6.50, that's automatically gonna change, and I'm gonna see other listings that are closer to this price point, right? And so if I go to the code for that particular similar properties component, so let me just close this because the resolution is not the best and I'll be scrolling forever. If I go to similar property, you can see I actually have similar properties and similar properties. So I'm actually gonna open this one. This is kind of the parent component. Again, this idea of composition. And you'll see within this parent component, it calls yet another custom component. That's what the C means, essentially custom component. So when we talk again about that composition, I'm doing composition of this smaller component or kind of this inside component. That inside component at the end of the day is basically a bunch of fields, right? So beds, bath, price, status. There's other things, but for a purpose of time, I'm not gonna go through every one of the detail. But when I go to similar properties, I'm using that component, and I'm using essentially an Aura iteration, which is basically a for loop, right? To go based on the data that I retrieve back from Salesforce, just keep spitting these out. This is exactly how I get these similar properties, right? But the interesting thing is, if I actually go to this design file, what I'm essentially doing in this design file is I am telling the app builder what kind of attributes, what kind of configurations do I want to put in the app builder for the non-developer to make a choice or to customize or configure this component with clicks versus code, right? So in this case, I have a search criteria, I have bedrooms, and I have price. And then I have kind of a default price range. That really is kind of more of a data range, because if you use bedrooms, it's obviously you're not going to have 100,000 bedrooms. And if it's price, you can adjust it. So let's see how that gets translated to the app builder. So in the app builder, if I go back, again, I want to edit this page. And when I edit this page and I go to this page, and I essentially drop similar properties on here, right? Notice there's two things. One, if my agent is looking at this property, they don't want to just see similar properties by price. They want to see also similar properties by bedrooms. And it could be more, obviously, you could add to this component. But in this particular case, when we talk about component-based frameworks, why are component-based frameworks now basically the standard for all new kind of UI technologies? The reason is because it's for reuse. So now I have that component that I've not only can be reused anywhere in my application, but it's also, or on an external site, right? Imagine I had my external property website. I can actually take these listings and surface it right there and then on those sites as well, kind of outside Salesforce. But here I can actually reuse it within my own page, right? There's essentially multiple aspects of those. And now by creating that design file, I've allowed for the developer to extend this component with easy kind of clickable configurations to non-developers, right? So here I set bedrooms, I set a price range, I saved it, and now I'm going to go back, right? So here's my page. I'm going to go down, and now you can see that the properties by price and the properties by bedroom, or similar properties, are all essentially working together and based on this record that I'm on. So if I go and I change this to 3, and I save, guess what's going to happen? Now I'm going to get, I should have gotten. I'm sorry? Oh, thank you for that. So I'll change that to 3. Dink, dink, dink. And now you get similar properties by bedroom. So hopefully this kind of exposes a little bit of the details or kind of the capabilities of Lightning components, right? But now I'm actually going to go and create a component from scratch. So it's great that I'm looking at my properties, but I'm the head broker. It's kind of my real estate firm, and I have a series of brokers. And it's great. I can go and see the details of the broker. Fine, I could click on related and drill into each one of the properties that this broker is a part of, but I just want to see that right there and then. I want to see the status of it. I want to see what properties are listed. So I'm going to go ahead and create that component from scratch. So I'm going to go back to the component builder. Again, because resolution's not amazing, I'm going to just close these. And the way you would do this is you simply say new and Lightning component. Now, when you do this, you essentially just put in a name, but you'll see that within the bundle, it gives you some options. It says, is this component for a tab? Is it for a page? Is it for a record page? Is it something that is specific to the record that you are on? Is it for communities? Is it a quick action? All of these are options, and it's so we basically implement these interfaces for you, right? Now I actually have this component. It's empty, but I've obviously created it before, and it's called broker properties. And in this case, if I open up the component, you can see I actually checked here, this is for a record page because it's related to the broker. And it implements this interface, Force has record ID I spoke about before, and it says it's available for record home. The reason why that's important is because if you don't have that and you go to the app builder and you're trying to customize a record page, that component won't be available as a component on that left-hand side. Right, so what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna just start with the super basics, and I have a bunch of code because after last night's fiesta and early in the morning, I'm sure the last thing you want to see is me typing all day. So I am going to save this. And it's pretty simple again. You have the attributes, one for the record ID, one for the broker, the record itself. I assign these attributes to target fields within record data. Now, I didn't explain this before, but it's worth going over now. In Force record data, there is if you see something that says target fields or target record, what that's doing is it's saying, I am going to go query Salesforce, I'm going to write the SOCL for you, and based on either the layout that you give me, or if I said fields, and I passed it, a custom field, let's say foo, or a standard field, whatever fields you want, I am going to go get exactly what you're telling me. You don't have to write SOCL, you don't have to write Apex, you don't have to write a client-side controller that then code calls a server-side controller. I'll just go and do it for you for a single record, right? And so in this case, that field doesn't exist, and I don't want this to gack. But when you get this target fields back, essentially what is returned and what's assigned to this broker attribute is a flattened list of fields that makes it very, very easy for me to reference those as an expression within my code. So a good example of this is right here in Lightning Card. Again, Lightning Card's kind of like a div with the ability to add an icon and a title. And I just want to reference, or in that title say, these properties are for this broker and their name, right? I could do name, I could do first name, last name, I could do first name, nickname. It's really up to me, whatever fields that are specific on that broker record. Now, if you use layout type, and we support full and compact, compact is basically, I won't go into it, but it's in setup, you can see it, there's a compact layout, a full layout. Your full layout is basically your page layout, right? So your PLE or your page layout editor. So if you happen to be one of our customers who have like 500 fields on your accounts or opportunities page, wait, let's see, who's the offenders of that here? Oh, there you guys go. So you will get all 500 fields. You don't have to write a SOCL for that and be like field. This is, you'll actually get all of it as part of this with just, a single markup tag. So now that I have this card, I'm going to save it. There's not much that you would expect. But if I go and I edit the page and I pull this in, you'll see broker properties here. I drag it over, I save it, and I go back, you're going to see that there's not much there, right? Well, that's great. Thanks, Marcus. You showed me a label, basically. That's not really what we want, right? We want to actually see the data itself. So in order to see the data, or basically all of the data related to this individual broker, I actually need to get a list of data. Now, a list of data is now where you have to go to Apex and SOCL, right? So right now, Force record data does not give you lists or collections of data. It only works on a single record. But we still want to use it because we want to use that to reference or to kind of set the query, essentially, to go get me and fetch me other data. And of course, I'm still using that for my label here. But what you'll see is I have that Aura iteration again. That's essentially a for loop. That for loop is going to go through an attribute called properties. And now let's look how properties get set. So properties get set by having a controller. This controller is called properties by broker. If you put this in your component, you are telling the component you have a server-side Apex class as part of this component. Like it knows to reach out to this class to get information. So if I open this class, couldn't be more simple, right? And when you really think about components, which is a lot different, or Apex classes for components, which is a lot different than what you probably did for Visualforce, it's almost always now just to get me the data. Just get me the data. I'll do all the logic in my client-side controller and JavaScript. I just need you to get me the data. In this case, it's only to get you lists of data. If you need a single record, just use force record data. So now you see it's a basic query. It takes one argument, which is a broker ID, and you pass that in, and it returns you the list or the array of properties. So now that I have my component set and I understand this controller, I need to go to my client-side controller, and I need to basically say, hey, go get this for me. So here's the final piece of code. So in this final piece of code, you do an init. This init, essentially, you bind to the component via this Aura handler, right? In this Aura handler, when you do this init, you say do init, and it simply calls and it creates an action. So an action for us is basically, it's like an XHR, it's a request, right? You're saying go to Salesforce, get me some stuff. So in this case, I'm saying go call this method on my Apex class, just right there, right? You have to annotate this Apex class with Aura enabled, or it can't talk to the component. It's also a good way to have methods within your Apex controller that are private, and so only the ones that are Aura enabled is public. I set the parameters, the broker ID, which I got from the record, and then in the callback, I just set this list based on the array that I get in my response. And then, of course, I set the properties attribute, which was in my component, to that list. Like, pretty straightforward, right? And now that I have properties set, I use Aura iteration to loop through those items, or essentially the rows. And all I do is I output the name and the status. I could add an image here. I could add an action, right? Like an action bar. And so there's row level actions to each one. It's totally up to me. But this is how this component works. So now that I saved it, I think, I'm going to go back and I'm going to refresh the page. Pro tip, probably you have to refresh twice. It's just, a client-side cache. And you'll see here for Victor, he has one property. If I go to, say, I think it's Jones, Michael Jones, he has several properties, right? So now what have I done? I've been able to essentially say, I want to integrate this experience. I don't want people to click around. I don't want you to have to drill into a bunch of related lists. I want to take components and integrate those directly into kind of the flow. And one of the very cool things about Lightning that is much different than Salesforce Classic as well is your components can work hand in hand with our standard components. If you remember kind of Classic, anytime like maybe you talk to your business owner or your business user and they said, I just need this small tweak. And you're like, okay. Well, in order for me to do that small tweak, I have to recreate that entire page. Well, now you don't have to do that. Like the details component, the related list component, that's all individual components that we own. You can decide to have those or not. But if you want, like those components actually can act hand in hand with your component. And again, because our components talk in two languages, events and attributes. The last thing I'm going to say with the whole 59 seconds I have left is something that's really cool in Summer 17 that we added is this utility bar at the bottom. This is really, think of this as the place for global actions, right? So in this context where I am a property manager, at any given time I'm talking to a customer, it doesn't matter where I'm at, and they're wondering, well, how much is that house going to cost? So in this case, I have a mortgage calculator. And if you live here in the Bay Area like the rest of us or in San Francisco, then this has got to be at least $10 million because that's what we do here. And because I can afford, I really can't, a $10 million house, then I get some crazy like super 1% interest rate of like probably 1.5%. But this is a way for you to essentially put components, Lightning components that are global, anywhere in the app as a quick and easy way to always get to it via this utility bar. So like on the spot, on time, except for one slide. So I'm gonna go back to one slide before we answer any questions, and that's really about our roadmap. So on the component roadmap, the roadmap Srini and I run, the biggest challenge I would say that our customers and our developers, all you guys have had to date, is essentially the number of base components that we offer, right? How many of you may have tried to build your own pick list component, right? A few of you, right? That's crazy. We should not be having you build a pick list component. That's something we should do for you. So, we have a wide set of components. They're listed on developer.salesforce.com. The one thing we would say is you want to focus on the Lightning namespace components, Lightning : because those are the ones that are all pre-baked with SLDS. Some of the older namespaces like UI namespace, UI : those, we had to create way back in kind of Salesforce 1 first launched. So, those don't have SLDS baked in. We plan to move everything and migrate everything to Lightning namespace. And here's just a small glimpse of some of the new components that are coming in winter. And we're really excited because once we think we get to this magical number of 86, which we think we'll accomplish in total by no later than spring next year, we will really have the complete set of true base components that we think you guys need to do almost anything you want, right? But you're gonna say you're wrong, and you're gonna say, I really wish you'd create this component, and that's awesome, because that's really what our job's all about, is to try to help you guys. Lastly, if you've been on our developer.salesforce.com, you've probably seen that site is everything you could possibly want to know but don't want to read. So instead what we're doing is we're going to be putting out a component library or a component suite, essentially a brand new set of kind of documentation around components that is really supposed to be a first-class kind of for component developers, where, get this, you can see the components and what they look like. You can see an example of code, ideally even fiddle with that code if you've used JS Fiddle, and copy and paste that so you can take it right into Salesforce. So that's coming as well on our roadmap. And with that, I think I'm all done, but I'll take any questions. Okay, yeah.
You said that the first example was to move outside of Salesforce and still use that code.
Yeah.
How does it work then?
Yeah, so we have a feature called Lightning Out. It's basically you can take this component, you can put it on an external site, hosted wherever, Amazon, doesn't matter. And the way you do that is you create what's called a kind of a connected app so that we can authenticate with Salesforce. And then you can put that information out, right? And like it should be information that's obviously you want to be public. But you can, that's all what these component frameworks are about, reuse, right? So now you can take that component that you leverage within Lightning Experience, use it externally. And if you guys don't know, you can always take a Lightning component, put it in Visualforce, and then surface that in Classic as a way to kind of migrate to eventually full Lightning within your organization. Okay? Cool. Well, thank you very much, and have a great end of our second day to Trailhead DX.